Welcome back, everyone, to the State of the Nation. Now, the central bank recently set its new single benchmark interest rate at 8% to bolster the economic recovery of this country. Now, the change to a new benchmark means the effective reduction in the policy interest rates would be around 50 basis points. According to the central bank, the decision to ease monetary policy is to ensure that inflation treads towards the inflation targets of 5%, while supporting the economy to reach its full capacity. That's a direct quote from the central bank. Meanwhile, the central bank also introduced the overnight policy rate as its primary tool to signal and operationalize its monetary policy stance. The benchmark rate replaces a system of two gauges under which the CBSL slashed rates by around 725 basis points since and easing cycle that began somewhere around in April of 2023. Now, this comes after the IMF has recommended the move to a single benchmark to improve policy transmission. So does this move aligns with what the government wants to do in introducing a better economic environment for Sri Lanka? Let's get some reactions, and for that, joining me now is global business cycle economist Dr.Kenneth De Zilwa. He's joining me all the way from Manila tonight in the Philippines. Thank you very much, Doctor, for taking the time to talk to me. Now, there were timelines floated during the campaign by various members of the now government who said that the plan will bring in economic prosperity very soon. But when we asked this from the Deputy Minister of Economic Development last week, he said it will take 2 years or more. Doctor, is Sri Lanka's economy slowly growing, or are we yet to see some shocks?
Thank you for having me. It's a very pertinent question. Actually, many people are of the view that the current government is caught in between a rock and a hard place simply because of the reason that they are currently in an IMF program, and that IMF program doesn't give them any fiscal or monetary space to implement their mandate given by the people. So I think the Deputy Minister's sentiments does kind of capture this, and this is the biggest challenge that this country is facing because, as I said, the IMF program is a program which ushered in austerity, and austerity measures were rejected by the public in this election, and they're looking for growth. And that growth, if at all to materialize, will need more space and more discussions with the IMF. Otherwise, the government will find it really challenging to deliver on its election mandate.
Doctor, this move by the central bank to introduce single overnight policy rates to the fiscal market, how is this going to impact the day-to-day movement of our economy?
Well, the reduction in interest rates or the monetary policy stance adopted by the central bank is a reflection of the current sluggish economic activity, because balance sheets are still highly leveraged and there is no room for growth in the balance sheets, as you can see. Particularly credit growth also has come down. And also, if you look at what has happened in terms of inflation, inflation coming off a high base has resulted in a deflationary environment being created. And as a result of that deflation, you're seeing the policy rates adjust. But I must say the policy rates have not adjusted significantly enough to stimulate economic activity. There will be a moderate increase in the aggregate demand, but I don't see that playing out too much. It'll give consumers and corporates some respite in their balance sheet cash flows, but nothing significant enough, because still most of the economy is grappling from quarter to quarter. And if you look at the numbers, it will kind of highlight what I have just explained. And I think there is a lot more room for monetary easing if there is a growth story to be ushered in the next year. And that is going to be of significance, because without growth, I think companies and the country as a whole will continue to struggle and face hardships in 2025.
Makes a lot of sense. Doctor, with regard to the IMF plan that is yet to be implemented, what are the areas of concerns for you? Because the central bank recently said our foreign reserves are hovering around, I think, closer to $7 billion. But this is when we are not servicing debt repayments. And also there are conversations of opening the market, especially for goods like vehicles. Anything that's alarming you?
Well, both of these are extremely alarming. One is that the reserves are built up purely because of lack of demand, and as you rightly pointed out, lack of debt servicing. If you look at our net reserves, the net reserves is something that we don't really focus on in this country. And I think the net reserves still stand as negative. And that has been there from 2015, I believe. Even though gross reserves stand up in terms of a number, what matters to this country is net reserves. And the net reserve figure is still negative. So we are not out of the woods. And the only way to address this net figure and to net negative reserves is to create more space and more opportunities for business to grow and bring in foreign earnings into this country, which is a miss in this current context. The lack of fiscal space is a huge negative for this country, because whatever policies that are pushed out in the mandate of the government, you will find it that it's hard to deliver on those fiscal promises, for the simple reason is that the IMF program is one that doesn't focus on growth and focus only on preventing further expansion in the economy. And if you look at the projected numbers of the IMF, they themselves concur to this particular trajectory of roughly about 2.5% growth. Remember, 2.5% growth is below our potential. Our average growth over the years, even during the war, has been around 4%. So 2.5% is not going to cut it. And if you are talking about a growth story, then the whole macro framework has to be revisited by the government and supported, because only by supporting the industries that bring in the revenue that we can address the reserve figure. And also the point that you mentioned about vehicle imports, now that is a double-edged sword. Yes, there is some revenue that will accrue to the fiscal, but that's not the great story. I mean, if you're using that as a kind of a rationale to open up for vehicles, I think that's a dangerous proposition, because vehicle importations have two negative connotations attached to it. One is we will lose foreign exchange. Secondly, I mean, even though it's hybrid, there'll be some level of fuel consumption that will add to the already large fuel bill, which is about 20% of GDP. 20% of our total imports, which is significant. And I think you have to address the elephant in the room, and that is the trade deficit. So I don't see much being done on that aspect, even though we continue to talk about ushering in investment into this country. The monetary policy and the fiscal policy is definitely not conducive to ensure that the gates for investment are open, welcoming.
Indeed, makes a lot of sense. All right, we have to leave it at that. Dr. Kenneth De Zilwa, political economist, all the way from Manila in the Philippines. Thank you very much.